Welcome back to the show. It is your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. And like I said, I told you I would be back here in a few more minutes to talk to you about how the pandemic has got us addicted to longing and why it is bad for us. Now, that is a lot of interesting conversation that we're going to be having. We have a lot of interesting things to be talking about as well. So make sure you stay tuned because, like I said, we have a lot of fun content coming your way. We have a lot of different interesting things that we will be talking about with you just to make sure you're updated, you're informed, and you are aware of everything that's happening in the world, because this is a show that gives you tips on your lifestyle, on developing yourself, self-help, personal development. This is that show, okay? So make sure you stay tuned, because right here on Relax Radio, that is what I do. I always make sure that you have the correct tips, that you have the necessary tips to actually make sure you are doing fine, and that you are getting all the help that you need, and that you can also, work on yourself and make yourself a much better person by the end of this year, and that's always not a bad resolution. I mean, it's not a bad New Year resolution to follow, right? Being a better person, it's not even that hard. You just have to take small changes and consistently keep doing that. That's all it takes. And you can be a better person by the end of this year. So hopefully that is what will happen. And like I said, I'm very excited to be here because I will be keeping you company all the way until 9 a.m. And this is the second hour of my show, which means that we will be talking about a brand new topic. So make sure you stay tuned. Now, before we get into the conversation, I want to actually quickly remind you that you can in fact contact me on not 7852473473, and that way you can be a part of this conversation. You can share your thoughts, your experiences, your opinions, your questions, whatever that you want to share with us. You can do that right on that number, okay? And also make sure to go follow our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and that way you can make sure that you are connected and you are always a part of Relax Radio, because right here at Relax Radio we focus on you. You are our priority. We focus on what you want to hear, what you want to listen, and we talk about everything, all the topics in the world. So you can always pick whatever it is you want to listen to and listen to this conversation, and in fact be a part of this conversation. So make sure you do that. Make sure you follow us on our socials for that purpose, because you can make sure that you are always involved in this conversation as well. And make sure you don't forget to download an app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. And that way you can definitely make sure that you can join into the conversation at any time of the day, because Relax Radio happens 24/7, okay? So make sure you do that. But let's actually get back into this conversation. We'll get into this conversation, or we'll start this conversation about how the pandemic has got us addicted to longing and why it is bad for us. Now, I have an honest question that I want you to answer honestly, because how many times have you Googled your ex during the pandemic? And how many times have you stalked the social media accounts through other people's accounts? Because I can't tell you, you're not the only one who has done that. I haven't stalked my ex's account in a while. I haven't done it during the pandemic, but I've definitely done it before the pandemic. But apparently, during the pandemic, the amount of times people Google their exes, or people, searched for their exes on social media has in fact increased. Now, Google searches for "why am I dreaming about my ex" actually shot up by 2,450% in April 2020 compared with the year before. So obviously that is a huge increase, right? And then you have this question, why are people dreaming about their ex, and why are they asking Google about it? It's because of what we're going to talk about in a little while. It's about longing. It's about how the pandemic has got us addicted to this certain sense of longing for something we can't have, and why it's actually quite detrimental for us, right? Now, that is what we will be talking about. Now, online dating apps as well have seen a surge of activity during the pandemic, and obviously that's because we were all bored at home during the pandemic. Come on, admit it. That's literally why you swipe right on Tinder. That's why you sent that risky text, because you were bored, right? You wanted something to happen in your life. And you know what? I understand. That's completely normal. I don't do things like that during the pandemic. I do it every day of my life. It's not just during the pandemic, okay? And then I eventually regret it later, but I guess that's just who I am. It's just my personality, okay? So, Online dating apps have in fact seen a surge of activity during the pandemic. And Ashley Madison, which is the world's leading married dating site, saw its signups increase from 15,000 members a day to over 17,000 a day at the start of the pandemic. Now, again, this is a whole other different conversation, but I'm just telling you the story on this because it somehow relates to it, right? However, this is sometimes um what I'm talking about is, cheating during your marriage and whatnot, because that's what the statistics are about. But that doesn't mean it's okay to cheat, okay? It's probably not the best thing to do. It's definitely not the best thing to do. But that is a whole other conversation that we will have some other time later. Now, most members of the site, whose tagline is basically "Life is short, have an affair," they actually say that having affairs help maintain their marriages, and there is a whole lot of reasons behind it, because actually, when you're stuck at home with your partner, and then you sort of begin to understand and realize these things that you don't like about them, and that doesn't mean it's an excuse for you to cheat on them, though. That's a very terrible thing to do, but that's the whole psychology behind it, right? Because before the pandemic, we weren't stuck at home, right? We went out, we had our own lives, and we'd come back home in the night and then we'd sleep, and then that was it. That was the only time you saw your spouses. But obviously during the pandemic, that has in fact changed, and things have changed so much. So obviously, because of that, because of all of that, it's very, very important for us to understand that before we get into this conversation that cheating is bad, please don't do that. But there's a whole other psychological process as to why people do what they're doing. So getting back into this conversation, only 1% of members actually saw themselves leaving their spouses. And when asked about this, those surveyed say that having an affair is either a great distraction or something they look forward to. So clearly, during the pandemic, people haven't been able to stop Googling their exes, and they haven't, they can't also stop themselves from trying to have affairs as well. So, what that basically means is that recent research actually suggests that we're wired for longing, and that we're trying to connect with unavailable current and past lovers is just one way we sort of react to that longing, right? And that's just what it is. They're basically saying that when it comes to longing, when it comes to you making these decisions that that are not really achievable. Like, for example, look, this whole cheating thing, or if we're talking about having another affair while you're still married, it's still in some way or form unachievable, right? And like I said, because we're human, we're always, wired to want things, have things that we can't have. And that's just how it functions. So obviously, this research as well suggests that we're trying to connect with unavailable, current, and even past lovers is just our way of trying to, adjust to the fact that the pandemic has given us longing. Now, for some others, anticipation comes not in the form of a virtual stranger, but in fact, a box on the porch, right? Now, what we need to understand is when it comes to longing, sometimes it's different for different people, right? Some people want romantic longing, some people just want materialistic, longing. So there are different types of longing, and that is what we'll be talking about all of that as well. Now, the pandemic actually cut many of us off from in-store shopping, right? We couldn't, and also it cut us out from dining and other experiences because, we couldn't go out. There was a lockdown and all of that. So things actually changed very fast for a lot of us. And it's in fact shown that in the US, e-commerce sales actually increased by 44% in 2020. And it's obviously, the same here as well. The e-commerce sales in the United Kingdom have increased as well, and that only makes sense because if you can't go out, then you would just order online. And I am guilty of that as well because, with all of this going, all of these things happening around, it always feels good to shop. I know I'm not the only one that feels that way. I know a lot of you out there, binge shop as well. And you know what? Sometimes it's okay to binge shop, okay? Not all the time, because don't waste your money, but sometimes it's okay to do it, okay? But basically, there's actually a surprising psychological concept which could actually explain this splurge. So when we actually feel like our lives are threatened, we develop new ways to cope. So with routines falling apart and the world uncertain, online shopping actually provides a way to feel some sense of control. And this is not the only instance where we felt like that as well, right? Especially when it comes to a lot of us, when it comes to, when it comes to dealing with new types of situations, when it comes to dealing with, different types of situations sometimes, because we find it very, very hard to come to terms with everything that is happening. When we feel like our lives are threatened, when we feel like normalcy is in fact threatened, we develop new ways to cope. So one of those ways is in fact online shopping, because you're trying to cope with all that stress, all that burden, that pressure that is there on you during the pandemic by buying stuff online. Okay, so that's what it is. And actually I have to say, this is not the first time this has happened as well, right? I mean, forget about the pandemic, forget that it is currently happening, but in general, if you take any other stressful situation, more often than not, when we are in these stressful situations, we tend to do things that will help us cope with it, right? And basically help us cope with it in the sense, we try to distract ourselves from what is actually happening. We try to distract ourselves from everything that's going wrong in our lives, and we try to do something that is different, try to focus our minds elsewhere, because we don't want to focus on the fact that our lives are not really okay. And you know what, that's okay, because sometimes you need that sense of distraction, you need that sense of, you know you need that sense of solace, comfort, if I put it that way, to actually give yourself some space and time from everything that wrong that is happening in the world, or everything wrong that is happening in your life. So that in fact is not surprising, that is in fact quite normal, and it happens all the time as well. Now Mike Miller, who's actually an outdoor enthusiast, admits that he spent about $4,500 online in the first 3 months of the pandemic. Okay, now that's a lot of money, but make sure you stay tuned, because I will only tell you the rest of this story after this break. So make sure you stay tuned. But right now, let's head into a small break.
Again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, you've had one to forget, God, there'd be an inquest. Me, why did you reject my son? Oh, I haven't rejected your son.
I want to talk about, how the generation gap, has how much it's changed, especially when you check the youth nowadays in comparison, to people back in the day.
I'd say when I was younger, it was more disciplined. Not now.
In comparison to now.
not at all. Not now. The way things are nowadays. The younger generation, you seem that they can't accept the word no, if that makes sense.
They can't accept rejection. Essentially, is all you're trying to say.
Yeah, they can't accept the word no. So if how did I do? Well, you didn't do very well, and they get upset. And when I was a youngster, my father used to say to me, because I used to be sport mad when I was very young. Well, still am sport mad, but like participating in different sports. And if I had a bad game, for example, he'd say to me, "You had one to forget." That's it.
Your dad sounds like a smart guy. I mean, yeah, that's the real fact of the matter. Yeah.
He'd say to me, "You had one to forget. Get over it," and that was it. So I dust myself down and do it again. But now, if you say to a child, if I went up to a child and said, "You've had one to forget," God, there'd be an inquest. An inquest. They'd to me, "Why did you reject my son?" "Oh, I haven't rejected your son. Or daughter. I've just told them that they need to buck their ideas up."
That's the truth right there. I mean, if you think about it, if you check the generations, like right now in the US as well, I've seen a lot of these things as well. In the UK, you get medals for participation. But what's the point? What are you trying to? Yeah, what's the point? Either you win or you lose. People are so afraid to put that whole notion of losing. When it comes to right now, the generation gap is just crazy. How much a lot has changed. Social media has taken control of our lives, and we don't even realize it anymore. We're crippled because of it.
That's absolutely right, Nick. Because, as you said, nowadays it seems that you get rewarded for failure. For the life of me, Nick, I can't get my head around that. Perhaps I'm just getting old and morbid. I don't know. I just can't get my head around how you could be rewarded for failure.
Welcome back to the show. It is your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. And if you're just joining in, welcome. A very, very good morning to you. It is me, Sarah, and I'll be keeping you company all the way until 9 a.m. because I do have a lot of interesting content to be talking about with you. Okay, so right now we were just talking about how the pandemic has given us a sense of longing and why it's very, very bad for us. So make sure you stay tuned to find out more because I do have a lot of interesting things to say about it, especially with how our brain works and how we can help ourselves if we are going through a similar situation. But before I get into that conversation, I want to quickly remind you that you can be a part of the show too. All you have to do is just text me on 078 and that way I can hear your thoughts, your opinions, your experiences, everything that you want to share with me. You can do that, and I would absolutely love to hear from you, so make sure you do that. Okay, but also make sure to go follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And that way you can always be updated and informed about everything that is happening right here in the United Kingdom, but also all over the world as well. And if you want to hear conversations about sports, technology, finance, health, economics, whatever it is, even gossip, entertainment, music, movies, whatever it is, we want to hear conversations about all of that. But make sure you download our app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store, and make sure that by downloading basically by downloading our app, you can actually be a part of any conversation that you want to. So make sure you do that because that's definitely going to help you have a much better time in lockdown, because we need to have conversations with people, right? We can't always be stuck inside our homes forever doing the same thing we do on a daily basis. So make sure you download our apps because that way you can be a part of that conversation and you can even share your thoughts with us. So make sure you do that. But right now, let's actually get back into our conversation about longing and why it's bad for us. So I was telling you the story of Mike Miller and I didn't complete it because I was talking about how the pandemic has given us a sense of longing and why it's very, very bad for us. So I was telling you the story of Mike Miller and I didn't complete it because I was talking about how the pandemic has given us a sense of longing and why it's very, very bad for us. So I was telling you the story of Mike Miller and I didn't complete it because I was talking about how the pandemic has given us a sense of longing and why it's very, very bad for us. So I was telling you the story of Mike Miller and I didn't complete it because I was talking about how the pandemic has given us a sense of longing and why it's very, very bad for us. So I was telling you the story of Mike Miller and I didn't complete it because I was talking about how the pandemic has given us a sense of longing and why it's very, very bad for us. So I was telling you the story of Mike Miller and I didn't complete it because I was talking about how the pandemic has given us a sense of longing and why it's very, very bad for us. So I was telling you the story of Mike Miller and I didn't complete it because I was talking about how the pandemic has given us a sense of longing and why it's very, very bad for us. So I was telling you the sto Mike Miller actually spent $4,500 online in the first 3 months of the pandemic, and that was because he had turned to impulse buying for the satisfaction when he realized that his usual pastimes, like travel and experiences, were actually cut off from him. Okay, and because of that, he'd always look at all these camping gadgets and sports equipment, and he'd always look at it because he knew he wouldn't wait anytime soon, and it would give him a chance to daydream about life returning to some kind of normalcy. And that's what he said as well. So when you're constantly looking at these things that you used to do when you were before the pandemic, when you're looking at those things right now and you're imagining the kind of life you have, you're daydreaming, then that would actually help you cope with the pandemic better, right? Because you're gonna think of, oh, maybe in a few months I could be out on the beach, or I could be hiking, whatever it is. That's what you would think. Right now, to feel happy, actually, many of us have actually turned to anticipation without guaranteed payoff. People invested time and money, surfing travel sites, even booking trips, not knowing if and when they'd be able to take them, right? And that is a huge problem as well, because a lot of us, did things like that. I mean, come on, I can't count the countless amount of times that I ordered so many different types of clothes, but I can't even wear it because we can't even go out, right? So we've all been in that situation. We've all been a part of that experience where we essentially look at things, we order things, but we don't really, but we do that knowing that we can't use them anytime soon because of the pandemic. Now, science proves that it doesn't matter if we use it or not, because when it comes to making purchases, psychologists have actually found we derive more enduring happiness from anticipating experiential purchases, okay, which is basically money spent on doing than the material purchases, which is money spent on having, okay. So that's a very interesting thought. That's a very interesting way to look at it as well, because when it comes to some of the purchases that we make, some of the things we do, we actually have much more happiness when we're just spending money on what we would be doing, rather than us spending money on what we will be having, right? So now, if we're talking about Mike Miller, now trips don't actually just make us happy while we're on them, right? They also make us happy when we're talking to other people about what we're going to do. And this was actually said by Amit Kumar, who is a professor at the University of Texas. But you know what exactly is longing, and is it actually bad for us? And if so, is there actually a way of curtailing this habit? Now, those are obviously a lot of questions that we have as well. But talking about going on trips, talking about doing these things that we can't be doing anytime soon because of the pandemic. The thing is, sometimes even talking about those experiences that we're going to have will make us happy, right? I mean, come on, it's fun to talk to your friend about the trip you're going to go to or the trip you were at, because it's a new experience altogether. I mean, you see different things you can tell your friends about. And I always love to talk about the places I've been to with my friends, because it's interesting, and also because it's beautiful as well. So, and in addition to the fact that it's beautiful, when you're explaining this story to your friends, when you're explaining everything to your friends, you're sort of imagining it in your head as well. So that is a whole other expression, whole other feeling altogether, and it does make you feel better. So that's why people keep doing what they do, and that is a certain way people long for things, especially in the middle of a pandemic. So since we were talking about all of this, we now have this question about what exactly is longing, and is it actually bad for us? And if it's bad, then how do we curtail this habit? How do we stop ourselves from spending unnecessarily, exorbitant amounts of money unnecessarily, to buy these things that we won't even be using anytime soon? Okay, so let's actually get into this conversation about why we actually long for things, why we have longing. Now, neuroscience actually suggests that our brains are wired to crave for what we don't have. Yeah, been there, done that. That is basically the story of my life. We all crave for things that we don't have. So, that's just how we are. So dopamine, which is obviously also known as the happy hormone, is released not when we get what we want, but when we anticipate getting it. So when you get it, you're not actually happy, but when you're waiting to get it, when you're thinking of getting it, then that's when your dopamine is actually released. So, our brains, in fact, release more dopamine planning a vacation than actually taking the vacation. Okay. And once we get what we want, that dopamine, it fades, and so we crave more. We start wanting more and more of that. And with anticipation being a key stage in happiness and depression rates rising, it's no wonder why so many people find themselves longing for things, because obviously, we're in this situation where everything has changed. We're depressed. We're trying to adjust to the fact that the world has completely changed. And because we're trying to adjust to those things, because we're trying to adjust to the fact that things aren't going to be normal for a really long time, we've had to come to terms with a lot of these changes. And because of the fact, in addition to all of that, depression, anxiety, things like that are rising as well. So because of because depression rates are rising, because people are much much more anxious than they used to be, like I said, it's not really a surprise that people are longing for things. People want things more, and they want to get that, they want to anticipate it, because that actually helps them feel happy. And that's just how our brain works. That's just the science behind it. Now, Dr. Kent Berridge, who's actually a professor of psychology and neuroscience at the University of Michigan, says that powerful emotional experiences and stress, such as those that might ensue after being locked down inside for months on end, due to obviously this deadly worldwide virus, in fact exacerbate the hyperreactivity of the dopamine system. So being locked at home, not being able to be in not having contact with your friends, your family, in fact, actually exacerbates the hyperreactivity of the dopamine system. Okay, in other words, to simply put it, these experiences, in fact, increase our appetite for wants, which is basically food, material objects, drugs, romantic relationships, as a way of discomforting, as a way of escaping the discomfort of reality. So basically, what happens is, because we're in such a terrible situation, because our brains know that we're in a terrible situation, and they know we're in the middle of a pandemic, what happens is the hyperreactivity of our dopamine system is exacerbated. And because it's exacerbated, our experiences actually increase our appetite for want. So we want things that we can't really have, or we want things and we anticipate getting it as well. And that is our way of just escaping reality. And psychology has proven this as well, because how many times have you got drunk, or done something really dramatic, or something really serious, just to escape from everything that's happening around in your life, happening around in the world as well. Obviously, we've all been in that situation. We've all been in a place where we wanted to drastically change everything that was happening in the world, right? So this is an instance like that. And well, to be quite honest, what could be so bad about that? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what we're doing is we are just trying to get what we want. We're just trying to be happier people in this world. That is what we're all trying, right? So why is it so bad? Why is it so bad to long for things, and why is it considered something that is very very detrimental for us? Well, see, here's the thing. When our want brain circuits have been getting a workout this year, repetition actually builds that habit, right? So what happens is, when we're constantly wanting things, and the thing is, we're in the middle of a pandemic, right? Which means that we're going to constantly want stuff. It's never going to end until this pandemic ends. So when our want brain circuits actually keep getting a workout this year because of repetition, it in fact builds habit, and then it eventually becomes a habit. And that's why it gets bad, because if you make it a habit of spending $4,500 on buying sports and travel equipment, then you're going to be wasting a lot of money, right? It's going to eventually affect your financial status. It's eventually going to affect your stability in life. So that's why it's bad, because we don't want it to end up becoming a habit. Now, any habit is actually formed through three elements, which is basically a trigger, a behavior, and a reward. Now, this was actually said by Dr. Jude Brewer of the Brown University. And if we're actually, talking about this instance, if we're taking everything into consideration, if anxiety is the trigger, longing is what distracts us, and the excitement is the reward. So the next time we're anxious, we're stressed out about something, our brain starts saying, oh, you know what, this doesn't feel good, so let's just start longing again. And then this behavior gets reinforced, because every time you're stressed out, your brain's going to be like, oh, you know what, you're not feeling good, so now we're going to make you want something. And when you want something, you start getting excited for it, and then you actually order it, right? So basically, if you look at it in that perspective, every time you're stressed out or anxious, your brain is just going to keep repeating this until it becomes a habit. So it's quite interesting how the brain works, but this is why it is bad. Now make sure you stay tuned, because I will be back to actually talk more about this. I will be back to keep you informed about why it's bad and how we change those bad habits. So make sure you stay tuned, okay?
And it gives them something to look at, and it makes them laugh. It makes them laugh. So that's why I do it.
Oh, and it could be a really good pickup line as well. Ladies who ask, hey, excuse me, so why are you wearing something so colorful? I mean, hey, you can always have something up on your sleeve. I mean, got me thinking, you want to stand out. Why do you want to stand out though so much, especially with these kind of shirts when you're riding? There must be a purpose behind it, right?
Well, when you say a purpose, Nick, what I do, I wear the shirts, mainly, one, because they're nice and bright, so they make me visible, especially if I'm riding on the road.
Okay. That's very important, right? Because you want cars,
very important. And also, like, people see me in, like, calves, and perhaps I shouldn't be saying this on here, I suppose, but in the bar afterwards.
All right.
And it gives them something to look at, and it makes them laugh. It makes them laugh, so that's why I do it.
Oh, and it could be a really good pickup line as well. Ladies who ask, hey, excuse me, so why are you wearing something so colorful? I mean, hey, you can always have something up on your sleeve. I mean, you look like a guy who would do.
You know me too well. You know me too well, Nick.
The valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday. And what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. What am I saving or investing for? Why am I doing it? When will I need the money? And how much money do I need? Yeah. So that's quite important, because when you're looking at your net worth, you've got to start with saying, well, what do I want my net worth to be, so that there's a goal, and then work backwards. How do I get there? And if I can start with £50 or $50 a week, if I save that every week, and you can go online and use calculators online. I don't have to teach you the maths behind it, but you can say, okay, and if I get a 3% return and I put this away for how long will it take to reach my goal? And that's called just this basic cash flow projection calculations. And it's what we use in financial planning all the time. What we say to clients is we say, okay, what is your goal? What is your objective? Where do you want to go to? And we discuss that in a lot of detail and over most of the meeting. And then the rest of it is saying, okay, in your exact circumstances, with your risk profile, with how you feel about investments and pensions and taxes and where you are and who you work with, and your education level or your lack of education or how involved you want to be. There's a lot of variables that we take into account. And then we say, okay, here's a plan. You start like this, that's great. And then we review it all the time. And we say, okay, we need to increase it, we're on track, we're not, this is what is happening. Because remember, when you're dealing with assets, the valuations that you place on an asset are always behind you. It's always in hindsight. It's never in front of you. And that's one of the challenges, right? Because you're always valuing what happened yesterday, and what you need is what's going to happen tomorrow. So that's a struggle. Yeah. So there are strategies. everywhere from £50 a week up to 100 million pounds, and they're different. Right? They range differently from everyone, but and from country to country. To be fair, different countries have different tax laws, so different vehicles. But from your point of view, at the sort of normal end, I'm not going to call it the low end because I'm in that boat as well. It's as tax efficient as you can get it. That's where you start. You use all the tax efficiencies and then you step up into different things.
Welcome back to the show. It is your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. And if you're just tuning in, we're talking about how the pandemic has gotten us addicted to these feelings of longing and why it is bad for us. So that's what we're talking about. Now, make sure you stay tuned because I do have a lot of interesting content to talk to you about, especially when it comes to longing and how to actually get rid of the longing we have, especially that because that is something that has increased during this pandemic. So obviously that's what we're talking about. So make sure you stay tuned. But before we get into that conversation, just want to quickly remind you that you can in fact be a part of the show. All you have to do is just text me on 078 to be a part of the show. And also make sure to follow us on our socials, which is basically Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. So make sure you follow those because that way you can be a part of this conversation and it would be absolutely amazing for you to share your thoughts and experiences as well. So make sure you do that. Now, earlier we were talking about what exactly this feeling of longing is and why it's so bad. So now let's talk about why it's wrong to escape unpleasant feelings, because it's not like we want to have unpleasant feelings, right? Nobody wants to have unpleasant feelings. So why is it so wrong to escape this unpleasant feeling? Now, ancient philosophy actually long argued that happiness is found in the present moment. And science, in fact, supports this because incessant daydreaming about the past and the future is related to psychological symptoms like depression, anxiety, and stress. Whereas when you're thinking about the present, it actually reduces those symptoms. Now, how incessant daydreaming actually affects us is when it comes to us dreaming about what we want, or us going on different apps to check out the different things that we want. That actually affects all of us in a very very negative way because we're constantly longing for these things. We constantly want what we can't have, and because we are constantly looking for things, wanting things we can't have, what that essentially means is the fact that when we can't have it, we tend to get anxious, we tend to have depression because we can't have what we wanted to have all along, right? So, binging on The Crown or even scrolling through Zillow listings for hours every night might provide us with a temporary escape, but these habits actually produce drug like dopamine highs that elicit more longing and lead to depression and increased anxiety. And it's in fact quite, that's just how our brains work. So when we don't, when we want an escape, when we want something and we're constantly looking up at it on on Zillow or whatever website it is that you use to get what you want, it's in fact not that healthy for a lot of people, right? And the high is actually so strong that almost half of Zillow users surveyed this year said that they'd rather search for a dream home than anything else. And the same neuronal pathways are responsible for addictions to both heroin and binge watching. So it's basically that exact same feeling that you get that exact same feeling. And because you're constantly wanting, anticipating, longing for things that you can't have, it makes you much much more depressed and stressed out because you ultimately realize that you can't have it. What's the point in you going on Zillow and looking at all these beautiful beautiful houses out there, but then realizing that it's way too expensive, you can't even afford it, and then you're just being depressed about the fact that you can't get a job, can't get a house, right? So obviously that is something very detrimental when it comes to how we need, or when it comes to the ways in which we can get rid of the get rid of these detrimental feelings or negative feelings that we have, these unpleasant feelings that we have, right? Now, the issue actually is that we tend to confuse joy and contentment with excitement and anticipation. Now, these are completely different things, but because our brain, because we always want that high, because we always want to, be happy and all of that, we tend to get confused with joy and contentment, right? So if you really look at what excitement feels like, it's got this restless, driven quality to it. And that's the dopamine urging us to do something because we're not satisfied with what's happening right now. And that's just how it works. Because we're not satisfied with what's happening, we dopamine will actually, it will urge us to do something, it will urge us to do something exciting, just to make us feel better about everything that's happening as well, right? So, of course, when it comes to binge watching movies, online shopping, and daydreaming, those aren't inherently bad behaviors, right? Because they're a way to find momentary reprieve, to imagine good things to come without actually being there yet. But and the thing is, healthy longing feels like nutrition rather than sucking the life out of you, right? But there is also something as too much daydreaming, too much, too much of an anticipation for something and you're not getting it, and how that in fact causes depression. Because we've all heard this thing, right, where if you consume too much of anything, whether it's movies, whether it's food, whatever, if you do anything too much, it's not good for you. You should do everything in moderation, right? And once in a while it's okay to binge watch something. Once in a while it's okay to, to do some online shopping, and it's okay to binge watch movies and whatnot, and that's completely fine. But the thing is, when you're constantly doing it, when you're doing it too much, then that's what is bad, right? Now we'll talk about daydreaming, because when it comes to the pandemic, when it comes to everything we've been feeling, we have been daydreaming about things much more than when we used to back then. Because obviously we're stuck at home, and when we're seeing all these beautiful furniture or beautiful homes out there, what we do is we just end up daydreaming about what kind of, house we want, or what kind of, future we want and whatnot, right? So there is something called too much daydreaming, and that is something that is referred to as maladaptive daydreaming, which is also, the abbreviated form for it is MDD. So this involves living in fantasy worlds so vivid that they interfere with, your sleep, your work, and your other day-to-day activities. That is what it is. And so the reason this is actually bad is because it interferes with your sleep, work, and relationships, and this is actually as means of distracting oneself from your own emotions. And the whole issue with that is the fact that you're distracting yourself. You're not being realistic. You're in this completely different world that you aren't aware of reality, you aren't aware of what's happening, and because of that, it distracts you from your own emotions as well, because you're in this whole different world, you're dreaming of things that you can't have. And because of that, you're sort of creating this barrier rather, you're creating this distance between you and your emotions. And at its most extreme, especially when it comes to maladaptive daydreaming, at its most extreme, a person paces while dreaming, right? Where they carve out hours of their day to enter their fantasies. They forget to eat and they can't sleep. And daydreamers often enter worlds they created as children, trying to cope up with great loss or trauma. So when it comes to this fantasy worlds they create, when it comes to, these different worlds that they live in during maladaptive daydreaming, they they carve out so many hours of their day to enter into these different worlds, to enter into their state of maladaptive daydreaming, that they forget to do very basic essential things for your survival, like forgetting to eat and forgetting to sleep. And because of that it actually affects them a lot, because it affects their physical health, it affects their mental health. They have no track of what is actually going on in the real world, and they're very, they're not in this world, right? And what happens is when they're creating these fantasy worlds, they tend to create worlds that they created as children when they were trying to cope up with great loss or even trauma. If they were going through abuse, if they were going through depression and whatnot, as children, those worlds that they created when they're children, well, that's what they're creating right now, when during maladaptive daydreaming, right? Now, one study actually shows that lockdown has resulted in heightened levels of MDD, and meanwhile, tens of thousands of maladaptive daydreamers have flocked to the MDD Reddit page and Facebook group page for support. Right. And look, sometimes Reddit is a fun place to be because of all the, dark humor, but also, generally because of all the content they have there, it's very interesting. But the fact that, people or rather maladaptive daydreamers have been flocking to the MDD Reddit page and the Facebook group page for support just goes to show that this situation is actually quite bad for all of these people. So it is in fact harmful. It is in fact harming a lot of people out there. So that's why it's bad for us to try to daydream our way out of the situations we're in. And that means coming to terms with our emotions. That means coming to terms with the fact that things are normal and making sure that we're not maladaptive daydreamers, right? And I know it's not as easy as it sounds. Obviously there's a whole other psychology behind it as well, but make sure you stay tuned, because right after this small break we will be actually here to talk about it. So make sure you stay tuned.
One of the easiest ways to increase your net worth is to ensure that you have higher cash flows. And one of the easiest ways to do that is to not buy things on hire purchase, not buy things over months and months because you can't afford them now, but you want it. It's kind of that delayed gratification. Rather than buy that couch, that car, that stereo, that computer, whatever item, and pay it off over 12, 24, 36 months at an interest rate, rather invest that money, make do with what you've got, and then after 12, 24, 36 months, take the money that you've now invested and buy that good. An asset could be anything that appreciates or reduces a tax bill. So it could still be a liability, but it reduces their tax bill. And I'm not going to go into the technicalities because that's out of our remit here. However, for our use or our purpose, what we are talking for the listeners here is I would put this definition of an asset forward. An asset is anything that increases your income. Anything.
Now, there's a lot of conversation around who pays more taxes, if it is the rich or if it is the poor, right? When you are basically going out and during a day, if you go to a restaurant, you have to pay taxes there. If you buy a car, you have to pay taxes there. So why is it even a conversation that, the rich pay less taxes or the poor pay more taxes? Why is it a conversation like that?
Because it's true, the rich generally pay less tax. A rich person walks into a Tesco's or a Sainsbury's, they're not going to get a different bill than another person, right? They're still going to pay the same VAT on those goods. They're still going to pay the same thing. So that's all the same. However, the differences come in if you can pay yourself from your own company, you can structure it in a way that you pay less income tax through paying a bit of salary, paying dividends, and so forth, and then also deferring income. Also, your pension payments or contributions can be different. So that increases your tax sort of gap, if you want to use it that way. Where a PAYE person just gets paid salary and bonus. And now those are the most highly taxed sources of income in the UK, definitely, in the UK.
Welcome back to the show. It is your girl Sarah right here on Relax Radio. And if you're just tuning in, if you're just joining in, we're talking about the pandemic. We're talking about how the pandemic has given a lot of people this longing, this sense of longing for things that they can't actually have. And we're also talking about why it is unhealthy and what we can actually do to make sure we aren't in that state constantly, because it can lead to a lot of other detrimental effects. So that's what we're talking about. Super excited to be here. It's almost the final few minutes of the show, but make sure you stay tuned because I'll be here for another hour and we have a lot of other interesting content to talk about as well. So make sure you stay tuned. But before I head into this conversation, I want to quickly remind you that you can follow us on our socials, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. And that way you can actually be a part of this conversation. You can always be informed and you can be updated about everything that is happening right here in the United Kingdom and everywhere in the world as well. And no matter whatever topic it is that you want to hear, whether it's finance, business, science, technology, whatever it is, you can always tune into Relax Radio because we talk about absolutely everything and anything right here on Relax Radio. So make sure you do that, because you can also download our app, which is available on both the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. And you can listen to us from either your iOS device or your Android device and be a part of this conversation. So obviously that's good news and that is amazing. So let's get back into this conversation. So is there actually a good kind of longing? And if so, what is that? Now, here's the thing. When it comes to longing, there is in fact a positive side to longing. And this was actually said by Cheryl Strayed, who wrote intimately about longing in her memoir, which is Wild, right? And she wrote about her longing for her mother who passed away 30 years ago. And she said that, healthy longing, when you know it can never come true, it feels like nutrition rather than sucking the life out of you. Now, most of the time when she longs for her mom, she says she actually feels a sense of wonder. Like, what a beautiful thing that she had the experience of loving someone so much that she will still really love them like that forever. And that longing has just come to feel like a gift. So sometimes, you can have positive longing. Sometimes that is very, very possible, but you must always know that the limit or the difference, the distinction between positive longing and negative longing as well. So it's important to keep that in mind. And then we have the very obvious question of, can we actually stop longing? If we have that longing, if we got it, if we developed it during the pandemic, then can we get rid of it? Can we stop it? And the thing is, to change a behavior, we have to get out of our heads and into our bodies, right? Because we need to consciously make that effort to make that change. So, beyond the thrill, which is basically the dopamine hit or the dopamine high we get from anticipating, we must consider the cumulative effect it has on us, the post dopamine letdown, and the emotional energy and time wasted, and the impact on those around us as well. So we need to consider all of those things, right? Like the post dopamine, letdown, how much of energy and emotion we actually waste, and even time that we waste, and the impact that that habit has on the rest of the people around us. Now, Dr. Nirit Dudek, who's actually a consciousness researcher at the Ben Gurion University of the Negev, suggests that psychotherapy for maladaptive daydream patients should help them be more mindful in the present, less judgmental of themselves, and much more aware of what triggers the behavior that they want to change, right? Because, like I said, again, this is something very important. You need to, when you're experiencing maladaptive daydreaming, or if you're a maladaptive daydreamer, you're not in the present, right? You're in the future, you're in a separate world altogether, and you're not aware of reality. So when it comes to helping people with MDD, or when it comes to dealing with situations and instances of MDD, what you would essentially do is you would work towards making them be mindful of the present, making them more mindful of the present, making them less judgmental about themselves, and also making them aware of what actually triggers this kind of behavior. Because if they want to change, they need to be aware of what exactly makes them become maladaptive daydreamers, right? What exactly is it that makes them get into that fantasy world and dream, whatever it is that they are daydreaming about. Now, a lot of people escape to these other realities because they don't like themselves in real life. And this is, you don't actually need psychology to know that, because we all know that when we're looking at someone, not necessarily looking at someone, but when we're focusing on other things, when we're focusing, or when we're thinking of ourselves as much prettier in a different way, or say if you're insecure about your face, which has a lot of acne, and you always imagine yourself as someone who has absolutely no acne, then you know that you're uncomfortable with that part of yourself. You feel like you're not worthy enough, or you feel like you're not beautiful enough, and because of that you want to change yourself, and that's why you end up daydreaming about yourself as someone else with much better, clearer skin or whatever, because you hate yourself in real life. So self acceptance is in fact a major part of the treatment, alongside changing what they can actually change. This whole thing is about self acceptance. Acceptance. It's about coming to terms with the fact that you're different, you're beautiful, but that doesn't mean that you're worth any less. It doesn't mean that you are worth nothing because you're different, right? In fact, it means everything, because it's good to be different in a world out in this world out there. When everyone's trying to be the same, it's always good to be different. So the key question is, what is the emotion behind the need to crave something, someone, or somewhere other than what you have right now? So obviously, when it comes to things like that, there is in fact a lot, and there is in fact a lot of questions. There is in fact a lot of uncertainties and doubts, because we're thinking of how we can change our behavior, how we are going to master the fact that we are focused on certain things, and how we're going to master the fact that we that we want to get rid of this behavior, that we want to change ourselves and become better people, right? So obviously, when it comes to instances like that, there is in fact a lot of thought, a lot of therapy, and a lot of medication sometimes that goes into it as well. So it's very, very important when it comes to longing, when it comes to dealing with your when it comes to dealing with this dopamine high that you get from anticipating things that you can't have, or anticipating things that you want, and different anticipations that you have. It's important to understand that a lot of it comes from the fact that we want to find security in ourselves. We want to find security in the fact that our lives have changed. We want to be much, much more secure, because we feel like our lives have been threatened. We feel like our security has been threatened because of the pandemic, and that is why people constantly feel this need. That is why people constantly anticipate as well, and they try to be in this whole other different world, a different reality altogether, because they want to focus on trying to get better, on trying to escape from those situations, those feelings of unpleasantness. But the thing is, it's not always good to do that, because the more you try to do that, the more it becomes a habit. Right now, this is what I was talking about earlier as well, that sometimes longing can in fact become a habit, and it can be a bad habit, because you're going to start teaching your brain that the only way your brain can handle, the only way your brain can actually deal with the fact that you're not feeling okay, is simply by making you long for something, and you getting that ex- you getting that reward from being excited about whatever it is that you're now ordering. So those are in fact quite dangerous. They are in fact detrimental to a lot of us, and that's why we need to take these steps to actually make sure that we aren't indulging in these feelings of longing for too long, and we aren't indulging in them in an unhealthy way, right? Because like I said, it's okay to do online shopping once in a while. It's okay to binge watch your favorite TV series or a new TV series once in a while. That's completely normal. But what's not normal is constantly doing it, is thinking that your only way of finding comfort, the only way you'll ever get over all your problems, is through that. Now, that is very unhealthy. And if it becomes a habit, it becomes very hard to break, because we know that when it comes to habits, there's that saying as well, old habits die hard. It is, in fact, quite hard to break it. So then it actually becomes our responsibility. It becomes our choice to make sure that we don't let these feelings of anticipation, these feelings of longing, overpower us and overwhelm us and make it into habits, but rather make sure that it helps us understand that it's okay to binge shop once in a while, but as long as it's done in moderation. Okay, so make sure you stay tuned, because I'll be back in a few more minutes to talk to you about the hottest new books that everyone should read. Because we're stuck in lockdown and we have a lot of time, we might as well talk about the books we all can read. Okay, but until then, make sure you stay tuned.